Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features X Factor number 69, cover dated August 1991, and this is part 3 of the Muir Isle Saga, following on directly from Uncanny X-Men 279. So the cover here is by Whilce Portacio and art Thibert, and obviously it features in the central image a psychic battle between Professor X and Shadow King. And the Shadow King there also showing his human host, Jacob Reisz there. We've got Colossus and we've got Val Cooper with a big gun. And I like this cover corner box by Portacio featuring X Factor. But this also happens to be the last issue that features the original 5 X-Men as X Factor. The next issue will be an epilogue to the Muir Isle Saga written by Peter David, and then number 71 of course features the relaunch of the book with Havoc as new X Factor leader. So let's open this one up and get to the inside, and the first page here features Val Cooper in the White House, and outside the White House there's a baying mob who've been whipped up into a frenzy of hatred by the Shadow King's psychic effect on the world. So Val here has called in X Factor, and they have been in retreat at Warren's Colorado home after the events of the previous issues, where they defeated Apocalypse, but where also Cyclops' son Nathan Christopher was sent into the future because he'd been infected with the technovirus and the transmode virus. And so here, this is a pretty interesting double page half splash featuring the full team going into action, leaping off the balustrade here of the exterior of the White House. And our creative team for this issue is Fabian Nicieza, and the note here is with lots of help, writer. So the help he was receiving was from Portacio and Jim Lee plotting this issue, but also they were using some ideas of Chris Claremont's. We've got a bunch of different inkers on the issue, Task Force X credited with being the inkers. I think the first few pages are by art Thibert. This double page splash by him, and one of the final pages, I'm going to make a special note of it, is definitely by Jim Lee, so I will point that out when we get to it towards the end of the video. Michael Heisler, letterer, and Dana Mooreshead, colorist. So X Factor leap into action against the crowd. Someone's been shot in the crowd. They use their various powers to pacify the crowd. Iceman there. And Cyclops zaps the shooter with his optic blast, and Jean there using her TK, her telekinesis, to lift away the injured man for help to Archangel there. And then we get X Factor coming inside. The crowd is still whipped up into a frenzy by the effect of the Shadow King. They come back into the White House, and they are met there by none other than Professor X and Colossus. But look who is there too in the corner, none other than Jacob Reisz, the human avatar, our host for the Shadow King, unbeknownst, it would appear, to Professor X. This page definitely not inked by art Thibert, so someone else responsible for the inking here. Not a very action-packed anchor image here from Portacio, a little bit strange, but we should note, I think, the natty suit worn by Professor X, and it looks like he's also got some braces there as well. Then the scene shifts to Muir Isle. Nicieza's caption calls it the Heart of Darkness, and I was looking at this, and it does not look like any other version of Muir Isle I've seen before. It looks like a tropical island in the Pacific, rather than a barren rock off the northern coast of Scotland. But however, this is Portacio's vision of Muir Isle. And we also have a pickup from a scene in Uncanny X-Men 279, where Forge used this big rifle here to knock out Rogue, and unaccountably she is in her Outback era costume. So there's been a costume change between Uncanny X-Men 279 and this issue. And Wolverine, he has whipped up a gizmo, which, as he explains here, baffles the effects of the Shadow King. But just as he's explaining all of that, they're attacked by Banshee. And so they basically try to tackle Banshee, but he's too powerful until Forge tackles him with the rifle once again. And Wolverine goes into action to pin down Banshee. And as he has him pinned up against the tree trunk here, Forge zaps him, injects him with what he calls the synaptic neutralizer, which brings Banshee around to his senses and breaks the effect and control of the Shadow King. So then they catch up, and Banshee explains, but we don't know how he knows this, that the Shadow King is using Lorna Dane Polaris. Somehow, somewhere, her powers mutated. The poor girl's become a type of human catalyst for negative emotions. The Shadow King took her and made her a nexus between our world and the astral plane. Disrupt that connection, says Banshee, and we'll disrupt him. To bring this madman down, we may be forced to kill one of our dearest friends in the process. So these are the stakes. So how has he learned that? Presumably, he's learned it from, I don't know, some of his observations before the Shadow King took over and drove him into an aggressive state, but not explained by the story itself. And then our focus shifts to 40 miles from Muir Island and 2,000 meters under the North Sea, and a submarine on which an international task force closes in on the Shadow King, and one man comes closer to confronting his destiny. So this is Professor X, and he's got Val Cooper there. There's X Factor, but also here in the corner, the Shadow King, helpfully explained to the reader, even though it's half hidden by Heisler's lettering here, by this kind of astral flaming effect. And here also in the background, a kind of spectral image of the Shadow King's astral self. So an irony here as Professor X explains his plan for landing on the island and tackling the possessed X-Men, that the Shadow King is privy to all of his plans. And Professor X in particular voices his suspicion that the human host now is someone on Muir Island, possibly Moira MacTaggart or my son, David Legion. So that's a host for the Shadow King. He's not right at the moment because, of course, the human host is right beside him there. But they're almost at the island, 10 minutes to go time. And then we have this little scene between Jacob Reisz, Shadow King, and Val Cooper, who is under his control as well, where he talks about how he is getting ready to savor his coming victory, worthy of his decades-long wait. Then we actually have a nice little touching scene here between Professor X and his original X-Men, X Factor, because they haven't had a moment to catch up. Professor X says, these are not quite the circumstances under which I'd envisioned our reunion. And Scott replies, we don't lead the kinds of lives in which things turn out as planned, sir. I heard about your son, Professor X says. Nathan, I'm sorry, Scott. I'm sorry I never had the opportunity to see a child I would have liked to call my grandchild. So fair dues to Fabian Nicieza fitting in this little scene here. And I think he's got the voices right, because that's one of my criticisms after Claremont leaves, that some of the characters don't sound right, but he captures everybody's voice well here in this scene. So then basically X Factor jet off towards the island, and then we catch up with Professor X aboard the sub still, watching proceedings as X Factor land successfully on the island. And then they go down into the the tunnel system beneath Moira MacTaggart's research institution. And they are met in the tunnel by a team of defenders, Psylocke, Madrox, Moira MacTaggart herself, Gambit, and Jubilee. And of course, they're all under the influence of the Shadow King. And what happens then? Well, X Factor tackle them and best them until the arrival of Professor X's son, Legion here, who disrupts the X Factor's victory, takes them all out with his pyrokinetic blast, and the Shadow King uses that moment to strangle Professor X, says to him, "You fool," because Professor X shouts out for help to Val, but the Shadow King says, "You fool, she's mine. Jacob Reisz has been my human host for months. I've been standing beside you all along, and you beg for Cooper's help? Idiot, the woman is mine. See how your life ends? The great telepath, unable to know the deadly thoughts of those around him." So all seems lost for Professor X until, turn the page, what happens here? Something unexpected. Val Cooper turns into Mystique. And the last time we saw Mystique was at the end of Uncanny X-Men 265, when it appeared that Val, under the Shadow King's control, had shot and killed Mystique. But no, something else had happened. We'll have to wait for another issue to get the full explanation. But it is Mystique who's here. She's not in the Shadow King's control, and she shoots Reisz in the head, disrupting the Shadow King's ability to have a human anchor. And the Shadow King uses that moment to take over Legion here. Pretty wild artwork by Portacio here, kind of recalling Sienkiewicz's version of Legion from New Mutants. And then here's the page. This page is inked by Jim Lee. I would bet money on that. And in particular, the panel that gives it away is this one. Just look at the rendering of Forge here, Rogue, and also Wolverine. This and Archangel here too. This is Jim Lee's character design style, and the style he used when drawing and inking the X-Men trading card series. This is Jim Lee. Take a look at that. Zoom in on that. Take a look at that. It's his style, and I think he's inked the whole page as part of the Jam team of inkers. And here is Polaris. So finally we see Polaris again. I don't think we've seen her since Uncanny X-Men 269, where she was trapped by the Shadow King and used precisely to ramp up aggression on Muir Island. And as was explained earlier in the issue, she is a nexus point here. Hank says it here, the Beast says it, but in order to trap the King in the astral plane, the nexus must be sealed off. And also we get an interesting recall here, another little interesting character moment from Fabian Nicieza. He's remembered that Iceman, Bobby and Lorna Bobby had a thing for Lorna back in the Silver Age, in the Roy Thomas and Neil Adams issues. So Iceman says here, I know, it's just I didn't expect it to be her. Let's get this over with. And then we have the arrival of Forge, Rogue and Wolverine, who are not under the control of the Shadow King, and Forge warns them not to touch Polaris. There has to be a different solution. But just at this point, Legion becomes possessed by the Shadow King. And again, just pretty wild art here by Portacio. And the Shadow King mocks the X-Men and X-Factor. They're out of luck, out of hope. I've taken a new host, the perfect tool, to avenge myself on your accursed mentor. That's Professor X's own son, David. Say goodbye, children of the atom. Your dream is dead, and finally so are you. And there we go, our end page splash. The whole Muir Isle Institution blowing up. And our notice to be concluded in Uncanny X-Men 280. So there you go. I hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on X Factor number 69, part 3 of the Muir Island Saga. If you did, please like the video, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for more content like this.